Matt, what's going on, man? Welcome to Dad Edge, my friend.
Larry, thanks, dude. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Hey, you bet. Last time I saw you, you were in my right ear telling me to keep calm and when I was in 31.5-degree ice water.
It's easy to lose track of all kinds of things when you're in a state of shock like that, for sure. Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
good time.
it was a good time. And then, yeah, as you guys heard in the intro, so I met Matt at the Squire program, which was the rite of passage that we did back in January. And we'll talk to you guys more a little. We'll address that here later in the show. Some of the things that Matt was putting in my head and my ear, which brought me back to life pretty much when I was freezing my ass off. But I really want to get started, Matt. I mean, you and I were able to talk quite a bit, and it just became blatantly obvious that you need to come on the show and share just some of your childhood, things that you've been through, how you go about navigating life now with your 12-year-old son, being married, things that you've done professionally. Like, you've got an arsenal of things to talk about. But I think what I'd really like to get started here on is your childhood, your upbringing. I mean, Bedros talked about it at the event. You talked about it at the event. And I just was like, wow, I don't think I've ever heard such a background. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, yeah. So it's I think up until you, Larry, no, I never talked to anybody else who could really relate to my background as much as anybody else. But yeah, so growing up, my mom was married to my biological father, who was an abusive alcoholic, and I don't have any memories of my biological father when I was a youngster, but I know the story that I've been told, and I do have the recollection of when we met him after we left. But my mom was pregnant with my youngest brother, and she was 7 months along. I had an older brother who was 6 years older than me, so he was 9, I was 3, and my journey kind of starts when my biological father came home in a drunken stupor, and for whatever reason decided to beat up on my mom, and she waited till he passed out. She committed to that being the last beating she would ever take, and then she scooped my older brother and I up, and we left in the middle of the night, and we got out of there. And so I remember meeting him shortly after. I remember him and my mom meeting in a parking lot at a Kmart, and my older brother and I were kind of shuffled away so that they could talk. But after that conversation, what I remember is that my mom telling us that if she would agree to not charge him child support, he would write off all rights to his sons. And she was okay with that. If he was willing to even make that agreement, she was willing to take it because she didn't want us to be a part of that circumstance. But, you fast forward over the years, my mom continued to not have the best choice in men. And so I had this revolving door. I mean, my siblings had this revolving door of men come and go. She has been married 8 times, on her 9th divorce currently. And that doesn't even account for like all the boyfriends and things. So as a child growing up, as a young man growing up, there was 5 siblings in the family. And we all just experienced this revolving door where it would be the honeymoon stage of the relationship. And then it would get old. They would start to argue, but always the pattern was always before the ex was about to go, she would already have the new one lined up. It was always consistent. The new guy would start coming around, and we'd always know that the days were numbered for the one that was there. And that was just the pattern, man. That was a pattern all through my childhood. Unfortunately, it resulted in a lot of games being missed and a lot of opportunities in parenting being missed because I think she was very consumed with the relationships that she was in. And so it was an interesting childhood for sure. But I'm sure we'll get into like how it brought me to where I was or am as a parent and husband myself. But Um, but the one thing I will say is that we never were not loved. So she always made sure that whatever guy she brought in, he had to be willing to accept the five of us kids. So she always put us first in that way, but that's about where it stopped. And so, we can go into whatever kind of details you want on that, but it was just this constant revolving door where I learned to really not get attached, and to keep everybody at an arm's distance at any time, because these figures, these male figures, role model figures, they were here today, gone tomorrow.
Wow. First question I have for you is, when was the last time you've seen your biological father?
That was it. That was the last time I saw him, when I was 3 years old. I did hear from him, probably about 10 years ago. I heard from him. He reached out. He called out of the blue, and at that time I was actually open to kind of hearing him out and seeing if there was an opportunity for us to reconcile in any way. I hadn't put any thought or energy into the relationship prior to the call, but after he called, I thought maybe we might see if there's something that can be done with this. But then it was clear, like he hadn't gotten any better. Like he was calling me drunk, and immediately I knew that this was not going to be a relationship I was going to expose my wife and son to. And actually recently, probably about a month or 2 months ago, I actually got another random call that from somebody said he had passed away. And so he was found deceased, alone, in his apartment with the TV on the couch. And probably the saddest thing, this is the Dad Edge podcast, so these are a lot of dads that are listening to this thing. I had no emotion when I heard the news. And the most shocking part about it for me, Larry, was that I felt like I should feel something. I had just learned the news of my biological father passing away, and I felt nothing. And immediately it snapped me into how tragic is that. And I cannot even imagine if my son felt the same way at learning my passing. So that was the last time I saw him when I was 3. A little bit of contact, many years down the road, and then he passed away without ever meeting his daughter-in-law, without ever meeting his grandchild, and having any relationship with his sons at all.
Wow, man. There isn't a whole lot of. Actually, you might be the only person that we've shared this very similar experience with, because, and I don't talk about this very often on the podcast, but my mom was married 3 times, but it was virtually the same experience that you had. It was like this revolving door of really chaotic, sort of stereotypical party men, right? That were toxic and, abusive and just kind of. The last guy she was married to was probably, quite frankly, the best. He was still a partier. He drank quite a bit, but he was a decent human being. So, unfortunately, he didn't live a very long life. He died kind of tragically, but I do think my mom and him would have worked out probably long term. But the man that I called dad, because my biological father left when I was just like 9 months old. My mom met a man when I was 4, and they got married. And he adopted me, because at the time my biological father signed parental rights over. That's why I actually have the last name Hagner and not my biological father's name. And my mom and him got divorced when I was 10, and it was really hard. And it was a crazy relationship, especially at the end. And I didn't see him. And I think it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I got a knock on the door from a clerk from the county court, with a file in her hand. She's like, "Hey, I represent blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "I just want to let you know your father passed away." And the funny thing is that my first question was, which one? Like, cause all of them were kind of in and out. And she's like, "Well, the one who has your last name, Hagner, he passed away, and you're his only living heir, according to our legal department. And he left you a house." And the house was like, I'm talking, this house was a ghetto house. And I told the clerk, I was like, "Well, the county can have it." I don't want it. And I just, for me, I share that exact same emotion with you of like, when she told me, I was like, oh, okay. And he left your house. I was like, well, you can keep it. And I wasn't saying it for spite. It was almost like I just I didn't want to deal with his things. I didn't want to go in a house where my dad had lived in for the past 25 plus years, seeing how he probably was living, going through like memories and stuff like that. It was just easier just to sign it over, even though it was probably like thousands of dollars of a mistake that I made, but I just didn't want to deal with it. But I too really started questioning a lot of things that were going on in my mind. Like, shouldn't I be upset about this? Like, shouldn't I feel some sort of remorse? Even my wife was like, are you sad? I'm like, no. And it was just kind of, she's like, okay, we just left it at that. But even as you're talking about it, because I've never talked to anybody else, I was like, man, should I have been? Well, but then again, I think that also speaks to our relationship really didn't have a whole lot of impact. And the impact that it did had was pretty negative. I don't know if I'm sure that probably makes some kind of sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes you learn what not to do from people. Right. And that's some of the greatest lessons learned are what not to do based on watching other people and things. So yeah, that totally makes sense.
You could have gone in several different directions, right? I have a stepmom that kind of shakes her head and she smiles, because I have a relationship with my biological father to this day. And my father has been married to her for 40 plus years. And she's like, I just look at your life and you're doing good. She's like, on paper, you should probably either be in jail or dead, because of just some of the things you've been through. But for you, people will use a childhood, I think, like ours to be like, well, this is every reason why I can't be successful. And other guys are like, this is every reason why I need to be successful. So what were some lessons that you learned super early on that were maybe really, really tough at the time, but have served you over your life?
I think probably the greatest lesson that I learned early on in regards to this whole thing was that taking the easy route and throwing in the towel may be easy to do right then and there, but big picture, it could be one of the greatest mistakes. And I learned that taking the easy route or quitting is easy, right? And the impact that had. So every time the relationship got tough, every time that the circumstances weren't ideal and the honeymoon stage had kind of played its course, the easy thing was the divorce. It was the breakup, and I felt the impact. And my siblings felt the impact of that. And my mom, she's a wonderful woman. I mean, I want to make that very clear that she's an amazing woman, amazing mother. She just had bad taste in men, and her upbringing was very similar. And so I think the cycle, it just didn't break with her the way it broke with me. But she told me at some point, she's like, Matt, I would always get married, and I knew that if the relationship didn't work out, that divorce was easy. And so I would go into the marriage knowing that divorce was an option. And that taught me a very valuable lesson, that if you go into a circumstance, especially a circumstance that absolutely will have its valleys as well as its peaks. But if you go into something where you already have an exit strategy, and to pull the ripcord when things get tough, that doesn't necessarily, set you up for success in a lot of ways. And there's a big ripple effect. I mean, that impacted the entire family. And so I learned that early on. I committed to myself that I would not take the easy path, that I would choose to do the hard thing first. And when things got hard, I wouldn't quit. And so I'm thankful for that lesson that I picked up early on, because it served me very well. But as I look back at it, that's probably the most significant thing is I sat back and experienced and watched the easy path continually being taken, and the negative consequences that had on my mom and on the family, and how I never wanted to be the person that chose easy over hard, and others, had that same kind of impact because of my lack of willingness to commit and do the hard thing.
I'm curious of you obviously have a successful family. Like I see your photos that you put on Instagram. You guys do jujitsu together. You guys ride bikes together. You guys do a lot of things together. You guys seem incredibly united. I want to just share a perspective that I had when I first started this journey myself. You and I kind of are cut from the same cloth. It's like, okay, I have a list of things that I know I'm not going to do, right? It's a laundry list of things that I'm not going to do. And when I first got married, I actually thought that that was enough. And what I found is that wasn't nearly enough. And if I could put it into any context, because you're former SWAT, right? Okay, I want you to talk about that too. But it's no different than if you were to suddenly go to the police academy and your long-term dream was to be on the SWAT team, and you showed up and they're like, oh, hey, there is no more police academy. And oh, if you want to be SWAT, you're SWAT. Congratulations. We're going to get you all your gear. In fact, you have your first mission tomorrow. We've got a whatever's going on, and you're just going to go. And here's 25 things not to do once you get there. But don't worry, you'll figure the rest out. Like, in any other part of our lives, like, we don't operate like that. There's a training ground, there's SOPs, like there's things that we have to do to learn how to be successful. But when it comes to marriage, when it comes to raising our kids, when it comes to some of these things, we're just like, okay, yeah, best of luck, best time of your whole life. Don't worry about it. Just don't do these things. And somehow we think that that's going to be enough and that's going to work. But I'm curious, did you have that same experience? Was there any aha moments that you had early in marriage or even in relationships? You're like, wow, yeah, I know what not to do, but I better learn a few things here.
Oh, I mean, yeah, of course. Yeah. I've had to figure out a lot of things on my own in regards to, marriage and fatherhood. But Larry, just to give you an example of how ill prepared I was for life because of my upbringing, I can look back now and laugh, but at the time it was very traumatic for me. Right. I remember I was finishing up high school and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I thought that the military was for old people. I had no exposure to anybody in the military. I didn't even think that was an option. I didn't have any real direction that I wanted to go, and I wasn't being pointed a direction. Remember, my mom was very preoccupied, and these guys, she had some longer stints of marriage, but the cycle continued. And so I finished high school and I knew college was supposed to be the next step. I had a friend that took me on a ride along, who was a police officer, and I liked what I experienced that day from the standpoint of learning that, law enforcement is the line between those that would go out and do harm and everybody else that just wants to live their lives and prosper. And so I caught the bug, and down the road about 50 miles, because I grew up in eastern Idaho, in Pocatello. So I grew up in Idaho Falls. Pocatello, about 50 miles down the road, and Idaho State University is down there. And they had a law enforcement program, a 9-month program where you go through and you become patrol certified and detention certified, and you earn certificates on both sides of it. So I enroll in that program. I get accepted to it. I move down. I find an apartment, and then about 2 weeks in the program, I get a call from the registrar's office, and they say, "Hey, Matt, how do you plan on paying for your schooling?" And I remember clearly, I'm like, I don't understand the question. High school was free. School's always been free. Are you telling me that college is not free? They said, college is not free. We need you to come down and apply for some student loans. And so in that phone call, Larry, it was like this moment of something I should have been taught years ago, right? I had no idea. And so I go down there, I apply for the emergency student loans, I get it, and I'm able to continue on. But, if that doesn't tell you how ill prepared I was for, life and marriage and parenthood, I don't know what does. So to answer your question, yeah, I had a laundry list of things not to do because of my experience and seeing what didn't work. And very few things that I was able to witness did work that I was able to carry into life. But I did learn how to figure things out. Like when it comes to FIO and figuring things out, I learned how to do that. And so I wouldn't even know where to start with the list of things that I've been learning as I've gone along, but really just being very committed to breaking the cycle, and whatever is opposite of what the cycle is, choosing that path.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just use that as like, what do I not want to repeat? And I go the other direction. And that's kind of my reference point. And then I just have to figure it out as I go. Thankfully, I'm mature enough now, I think, on my journey to where I have a lot of the, essential things figured out, to where I'm not getting any phone calls from the registrar's office saying I owe on student, or I got to figure out how to pay the student loan thing. But yeah, man, it's been a ride for sure.
Wow. That's a fascinating story. Like,
Yeah.
wait, what do you mean I have to pay? I thought this was free. Isn't this public school? Come on now.
Right. Right.
But no, looking back on your childhood, I mean, you saw this revolving door of men that were coming through. You saw some pretty poor examples of things. Looking back on your childhood, was there a moment that you can identify that you're like, this is not going to be my life? Like, these types of things are not going to happen on my watch, and being very deliberate about that decision. Do you remember anything like that?
I do. I remember my mom telling me and my brother that she was leaving Don, who was like, who I loved. I mean, I was probably at that age 9 years old, 10 years old. And, just that age where I really looked up to him. That was my father figure. And he treated us really well. He was, he always had a cupboard full of goodies and the Oreo cookies and the treats. He worked for Delta Airlines. And so he would take us on these tours, these big planes. And,
that's cool.
and he invested some time into me and the siblings. But I remember, her telling us this, and she's on the floor, she's crying, and she's got me and my brother and we're crying. And I just remember looking at the lounge chair that he would always sit in, and telling her that I didn't want that him to go, and asked him if he was going to be taking the lounge chair or not, the recliner. And, at that age, I guess that's how I was trying to compute it. But I remember that point very vividly, and realizing that the heartbreak that you cause other people when you make the wrong decisions, and when I say the wrong decision, it wasn't necessarily to leave him, because I don't remember the circumstances as to why she married him she went with him to Vegas. They could fly for free because he worked for Delta, right? So they did a trip to Vegas. They came back married. Nobody knew they were going to get married. I don't even know if they knew they were going to get married when they left, but that's the how it went. And so, but those kinds of decisions, those kinds of wrong decisions were like the reference point. So I would say I go back to that place when it really settled in, like, man, this is not the kind of experience that in repeat experience that me and my siblings should be going through. And I didn't want to see that guy go. And then there was one other point where I was a little bit older, I think about 12 years old. About 12, you still have that innocence about you, right? You're kind of, you're going to the teen stage. So the innocent days are quickly going. But I remember I'm 12 years old, and I have a friend come over, and we're in my room, and we're looking at this shelf of trophies. I love playing sports. And I had about 5 trophies on this shelf. And of the 5, there was 3 different last names on the 5 trophies. And he asked me, he's like, why do you have, different last names on this? And I said, well, because my mom gets married, and then I just take their last name. And I'm like, you don't have trophies with different last names? And like, no, I've got one last name. My mom's only been married one time. It's the same name on all my trophies. Yeah. And I remember, that was another point, Larry, where I was like, so this is not normal. and I never looked at those trophies the same way again. Once I realized I wasn't supposed to have different names across them. And that's really when I started to get, about 12 years old at that point, really started getting a lot of clarity as to what I thought was normal is not normal.
That makes, God bless, man. Were we raised together at some point? Like, so I didn't have, so my birth name was different than my name I have now. So my birth certificate has changed once already, but I remember kind of along that storyline. I remember being in the 5th grade and we were literally learning about sex in class. And I raised my hand. For some reason, the teacher called on me and I was like, it's kind of weird. I was like, but I was at my mom and dad's wedding. And back then, like in the 80s, like it was, divorce was, I wouldn't say common, as it's definitely not as common as it is now. But if you knew somebody who's getting a divorce, you're like, wow, I know somebody who's getting divorced, right? Or if you came from a family that was divorced, it wasn't nearly as common as it is now. And the teacher looked at me and she's like, why were you at your parents' wedding? And I was like, and I'm sitting there thinking like, well, weren't we all at our parents' wedding?
Right.
Right. And because it just didn't make sense to me at the time. And I remember also being in 2nd grade. I grew up Catholic, so we were getting our first communion. And I remember saying like, hey, we were going over the sacraments and one of them was marriage. I was like, oh, I remember being at my mom and dad's wedding. And I remember my teacher still to this day, Mrs. Tilka, she goes, why were at your parents' wedding? Like, your parents haven't been married since before you? And I'm like, well, no, like it just didn't register. Right. So, I think it's amazing that you had that aha moment. I'm sure at the time though, being between the ages of 9 and 12, I remember that. I mean, that's like and Carter, your son, is right around that age. I know he's 12, but it's at this sweet spot age where you're very aware, but yet not so aware, but things are starting to click and you're starting to put pieces together and you're like, oh, wow. Like, oh, okay. Oh, wow. Like there's that, But yeah, I feel you on that one, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting experience for sure, yeah. But it's better for it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you say this about your childhood too. I do with mine is like, cause my kids will ask me, like, tell me about something. I was like, well, what do you want to know? And they'll ask me a question. I'll tell them like, oh, I feel so bad for you. Ethan in particular, the one you met at Squire. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, don't, I don't feel bad for me. I was like, you don't either. I was like, I actually am thankful for how I grew up. That wasn't always so. I was like, but it taught me things that I find very useful now. Right. So don't feel sorry for me. I am curious though. What was it about law enforcement that really had your attention? I'd love to hear from you on that. And I want to see if there's a common theme of other, what I would call special operators who have been on the show, especially Navy SEALs, who have similar backgrounds. And then they go into something that is in a protector sort of career, and then even specializing into doing something even more specialized. So, and I'll get to that, but why law enforcement for you?
I think that's exactly what it was. Is I grew up without that protector. What I knew was my mom. She didn't stop at my father being the last one that was the abusive relationship that she got in, and I remember distinctly the next man that she married, and that ended up being the father of my 2 little sisters. He would just beat on my older brother. And, he's 6 years older than me. And so I remember just feeling so helpless about that. And I could hear it going on in the other room. And he never hit on me or my little brother. But man, he would beat on my older brother. And that carried with me because, you look at your mom and you want to protect your mom. She was that central figure to us kids, and she was the consistent one. And, as I said before, like she always made sure that there was no shortage of love. Like it was an absolute deal breaker if the guy didn't want to be a parent and wasn't willing to step in to that role. Even if it was okay for it to be short-lived, that was always like central. So I think growing up and having that as my like foundational memories as a child, and that feeling of vulnerability and that feeling of like wanting to protect but couldn't protect. Um, and then understanding as I got older that there needs to be a head of the household. There needs to be that protector and that provider, and not ever having really a guy that would do that. I think it just became hardwired into me to want to step into that role and realize that there's others out there who are also vulnerable, who can't protect, and wanting to protect those that couldn't protect themselves. And I think that's what really drove me into that profession, is to take on that role, and then just to eliminate as many bad guys and many people out there that would victimize as possible, and provide as much peace and stability to people as possible. And so that's what got me into that. When it came to the SWAT thing, I really, and I do contribute this to my upbringing as well, and to your point too. And we talk about this in the project, like what happened to us as a child, and whatever traumatic events, those things that shape us, we can look back and we can say, because of that, we now have these superpowers in life. And if we kind of reframe it, we can see that we do all kinds of really great things as a result of the traumas and the experiences that we experienced early in life. And in regards to the SWAT, I found, and others found within the department too, that I was really able to keep a very cool head in very chaotic circumstances, and was really, I didn't get wound up about things. I didn't get really emotionally attached to things to where I was making emotional decisions. And because of that, I could take complex problems and problem solve it really quickly, and while keeping a cool head, and going back to like that figure it out thing, like it was just part of my DNA to just FIO, just figure it out as I go, and to problem solve. And because of that, I got invited to test on the team after a few years on patrol, and I really thrived on the team. I spent 5 years as an entry operator, and then even elevated beyond that to a task force officer with the U.S. Marshals fugitive team, which was even a next level high risk thing. And part of the ability to emotionally detach from these really chaotic circumstances, and they're very dynamic and they're evolving. I learned through my childhood to be able to detach myself and put things in compartments and just look at the task at hand. I contribute that to these revolving doors. I really learned to be able to just emotionally detach, which you look at the downside is, being a father and a husband. We can talk about that too, because that's a constant work in progress. But as it relates to the SWAT thing, it helped me. It really helped me be able to work within a team, to be a part of just a dynamic circumstance. And I loved it. I loved it a lot. But my wife, she wasn't overly thrilled after 5 years. She's like, all right, you gotta stop. She would learn more, oftentimes what I was doing and where I was at based on what the news was reporting than she would hear from me. And that started taking its toll on our marriage. So I had to make a decision, and obviously I chose the marriage.
I am curious to hear about how this mindset, obviously you shared how it serves you in the professional setting as you're dealing with situations that are unraveling that you need to detach from. But yeah, I'm very curious about how this has been a hindrance maybe, and how you've had to work through some things as it relates to marriage, and maybe even people you've dated in the past. And even while you think on that, I too came from that type of background. I remember vividly telling my wife as we were dating through college, I'm not the guy you're going to marry. And I often told her, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get married. I was like, to be honest, like I haven't seen a marriage really work out. I don't know how to make a marriage work out. And to be honest, my view of marriage, and this is terrible to admit, it's a lot like what you actually said, your mom, her perspective on marriage. I was like, marriage is the first step to divorce. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I was terrified of that because I could detach from relationships pretty easily. And I too have had to do so much freaking work, man. So much work on how to communicate properly, how to even be okay with some of my emotions, how to be my most authentically real self. Because I think when you grow up in a situation like you and I did, it's very hard to be like, okay, if I be 100% authentically real, I'm also putting myself out there that this person, could kick me to the side at any point in time because they've now realized that I'm just not good enough. Right. That's the crazy way we think, or at least that I did. And I've had to reverse engineer a lot of those things out of how I operate in a relationship. I can definitely say that it's definitely a heck of a lot better than it ever has been, but it hasn't been in the absence of doing a shit ton of work.
Yeah.
Right. So what was it like for you?
It's, same. I mean, it started with just the recognition that that was part of my personality. I would be able to experience things, and cops in military, that people, you go to a barbecue or you go to a gathering, everybody wants to know stories, right? And you're like, hey, tell me about this one time, and have we ever have to do this? And you'd be like, yeah, you tell stories, and I would tell stories and be very nonchalant. They're like, that you had to do what, and you saw what, and I have a story of another time where long standoff, SWAT standoff that ended up with the guy shooting himself. He had a shotgun under his chin and a 357 to the side of his head. He tried to do both at the same time, but the shotgun went first, and we were on the standoff forever. It was 10 hours, and I was starving. We'd commandeered this lady's house. I was pulling sniper cover, and thoughts about going rummaging through her cabinets to see what she had in there passed through my head, but I didn't. And long story short is the outer perimeter guys all got pizza. Like somewhere along the way, the 8-hour mark, something got pizza, but we didn't get it. We were too close. He couldn't get it to us. This guy offs himself, and everything just goes everywhere. Right. And this van pulls up, and we step outside the house, and some of the teams put some hazmat suits on to go clear it. And there's pizza in this van, and it's a meat lover's pizza. And I'm just like, this is literally like within 60 seconds of this guy blowing his head off, and like, how could you eat? And I was like, I didn't even bother me. It was just, and so all that to be said is those are the areas where it helped me, but it's recognizing that's part of my personality is first and foremost, right? Is the self-awareness to realize that things that bother other people that really should impact me differently don't. And being sensitive to that and recognizing how it impacts others, and really having a wife that helps bring me back and grounds me in those areas. And her, she will remind me, she's like, hey, you haven't reached out to this friend in a while, or this thing is happening and you don't seem to be overly emotional about it, but it's a kind of a big deal. And it just being aware and then conscious of how other people feel, how my wife feels, how my son feels, how friends feel, and then putting in the work to address it. And it's a part of who I am. And I don't know that that'll ever change from the standpoint of like how I see things, but just continually be aware of it and aware that other people feel much more than I do. My wife will accuse me of not having feelings at times. And that's important because she's communicating to me and she's saying something. And so that means that I have to bring it full circle with responding the way that she needs with her love language and with her style, and being aware and present physically and emotionally present. And so I just put a lot of intentionality around that, and it serves me well.
I've got a question. I don't know if you've ever been asked this before, but I think a lot of people go about marriage as, so let's just take your personality, right? It's a gift and a curse being able to compartmentalize all these things that are happening, detach from outcomes and things that would bother most people. And there's two ways that you could go about this. In one direction, you've gone one way with it, which I believe is probably the best direction, which is like, hey, I have this skill. It's a gift. It's a curse, but I also need to be I have to have a lot of emotional intellect to be able to read my wife, intentionally love her, intentionally communicate, despite the fact that I can detach. What I think, and so that's one direction. The other direction that I've seen men go into is like, well, that's just not who I am. This is how I am. Take it or leave it. I'm this way. I detach, I compartmentalize. That's how I lead in my professional life. That's how I'm going to parent. And that's how I'm going to be married. You can either deal with it or not. And I think that, unfortunately, I have a good friend of mine. He's a professional athlete. He actually is a sponsored athlete for Tough Mudder. He runs, like, obstacle races are his life. And he is a tough dude, but that's how he goes about his life. And unfortunately, it has cost him dearly in relationships, because of that mindset. So what was a switch that might've flipped for you? It's like, oh yeah, I probably do need to get this a little tweaked over here. Like being able to give my wife what she needs, be emotionally available for her, be able to read her, be able to intentionally love her the way she needs to be loved. Was there a moment that it just sort of clicked and you're like, okay, I'm on, I need to do this?
I don't know that there was a moment per se, because my wife and I, we've never separated. We've never, we haven't had anything that really got us super close to divorce where I had this awakening, but I do recognize that other person you're talking about, and that other person is the person I have to beat up and throw in the trunk and keep there. Right. But they creep out every once in a while and they want to, but that person is a very selfish person. That person that says, this is who I am, take it or leave it, is a person that is not recognizing the compromise that every relationship must have. And I think that's a very quick way to live a very, independent life of relationships, right? And a very lonely life, because you will push other people away, and other people do have emotional needs. And so I recognize that second person that you just described, and but I'm very intentional about locking it up, like duct taping it, gagging it, throwing the trunk, and not letting out. But what I would contribute to it, I would say that proximity is massively powerful. We might get into the project, but I would really contribute the project instructors and a lot of progression in my relationship, starting about 3 years ago when the project instructors came together and we started formulating the project, and the conversations, the real deep and meaningful conversations that we would be having about emotions, about relationships, about finances. And that was the first time I think that I was able to really talk with other men in a way that I felt safe, and I felt that I could be real, and we dropped all superficial conversation, and then I became very intentional about observing them. Right. And it was, before Bedros, we didn't have a weekly date night. Again, like going back to my upbringing, I didn't have anybody that really showed me the way, that taught me what was important, that gave me the skills or the knowledge of how to have a long, fruitful relationship. And so, as I started to really observe these men, Ray and Aaron and Bedros and Steve, as part of the project, and realizing that that I could learn from them. And if I incorporated the things that they were doing that were successful into their marriages and as parents, that was really the ticket that I was missing. That was the thing that I didn't have. And so that was about 3 years ago was when I really started being much more aware of how not just what I wasn't going to do and referencing all the things that I had been a part of that I knew not to do, but now it was being shown like what to do and how to lead a family, and that you must learn how to lead yourself before you could ever lead anybody else, and to take off the mask and not be a fraud, right? And so I would say it was a dimmer switch. It started there with like this transition of no longer looking in the rearview mirror of what not to do in those reference points, but now looking to these guys, getting close proximity with them, and learning what to do proactively. And then since then, it's just been, as we've graduated more project guys, every project class we do, it's absolutely every bit of therapeutic as it is for us as instructors, that it is for the candidates that are going through. And so that the dimmer switch just continues, as Ed Milet says, it's like the thermostat, right? It just continues to turn up. And I refuse to go backwards. I refuse to do that. And so I really contributed to that more than anything, that proximity of these other guys who are very intentional about living their true, authentic, full selves, and being that for not just themselves, but for those around them, their family, their loved ones, their communities.
So it sounds like the game changer for you has been having a group of like-minded, iron sharpens iron, take the mask off, be your most authentic self, and being able to dive into crowdsource wisdom with other men who are just as eager to learn from each other as well as to contribute.
Yeah. Very well put. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, as we wrap up here, what I'm so curious is you're raising a son, right? You've got Carter. I'm raising 4. So I'm going to be going through Squire 4 times. So just, my wife even asked me, she's like, Colton is 6. Are you going to be doing this like when you're 57 years old? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Ice baths are great at 57.
Yeah.
They don't suck any less, but they're still great for you.
That's right. But I'm curious, what is, you're one of the instructors for the Modern Day Night Project. That's what we're talking about. Also one of the instructors for Squire. But what's most important for you as you evolve your relationship with your son?
The most important thing for me is for him to never know that feeling of abandonment, and to never feel like that the father figure that he has isn't there for them, isn't there for them 1,000%, and ever question it. I started telling my son that he was my best friend when, from as little as he could understand. And on a daily basis, that's our routine. We tell each other we're best friends. And I don't want my son to ever know anything other than having a father that's there, that supports him, that believes that he can achieve anything, and just believes in him. And so, I think for me, the most important thing is that he just has a father that will be present, that is a protector, is a provider, and that I am the person that is living a life in a way that is a role model for him, and that I'm living in a way to where he becomes the man that I am. And so he helps keep me accountable in a lot of ways, and he doesn't know it yet, but that's absolutely the truth.
Isn't that powerful that your kids can actually be the most powerful accountability partner that you could possibly have? Yeah, because you're being watched, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question for you. Do you ever think that it's dangerous to tell your son that you're his best friend?
I don't know. I do know that it can be dangerous for parents to be a friend before a parent.
Yeah.
And I know that, that when parents, and I experienced this a lot in law enforcement, in a lot of juvenile beyond control calls, right? Where parents, they didn't want to be the parent, they wanted to be the friend. And so they were buying the alcohol, they were facilitating the parties, they were allowing, the truancies in school, and they made excuses for it. And they ended up being, much more of a problem for their kids and their development than I think they intended. And so I think that there is a problem in choosing to be a friend first and then a parent, which I'm not. I want to be. There's a lot of conversations I never learned how to have. You bring up like the sex education thing, and we moved around so much as part of this relationship piece that I never went through sexual, sex ed. I missed it because I was always changing schools, and so many lessons that I'm having to figure out on my own. And leveraging, people like you and others, in the project instructors who are just very intentional about being dads. I know what I don't want. I don't want a son that represents the truant kid, the kid that was the juvenile beyond control when I was in law enforcement. But I do want him to know that he can come to me for anything, and that if he is ever curious about anything, we can have a conversation, and that we can have that level of relationship and trust. But I never wanted to be a problem either. So I do think if I allowed it to, it could be it could be much more of a hindrance or a problem. But that's also something that I'm very self-aware of as I go. And so far, he's an incredible young man, incredibly respectful. And so I think so far I've struck a good balance.
I would agree with you. I was curious about that because you said that, because I too have a very similar view. Like I always tell the kids, I'm your dad first, I'm your friend second. And when it comes to guiding you, there's the majority of the time I'm not going to be your friend. And there will be tough love moments, right? But hey, listen, we can go to the gym, we can work out, we can hang out, we can have a good time. We're going to have a lot of laughs. There's going to be a lot of your life where we're going to feel like partners in crime, right? But when it comes to, guidance and hard rules of yes and no and things like that, like don't expect me to be your friend. Like and I'm clear with it, but it sounds like you are approaching the exact same way.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, and he knows too, like he knows that he knows not to, cross the lines, and he understands that I'm living in a way of what it means to be like, what we say in the project, a savage servant, and to what it means to be a protector and provider, and when you are to be a lion and when you're to be a lamb. And so he knows too, when he's starting to cross a line, and what, where the rules are. And there's no like trump card saying, well, we're friends, and so I can do it. He knows not to pull that stuff also. Yeah.
That's cool, man. I really like that. I want to make sure that the guys, well, real quick, do you have a quick minute for a story?
Yeah.
All right. So, I'm going to really throw myself out here talking about being authentically real. So when I went, obviously we won't talk too much about what happens at the Squire event. It was a fantastic experience for me. I didn't know really what to expect. I felt pretty confident that I would be able to get through the physical things that were thrown at me. There was one evolution that I was not excited about. And you know what that one is. And I got to tell you, and even my son, who's 15, he's like, is there anything that you're dreading about this? I was like, there's one thing. I was like, I know I'm gonna have to get in an ice bath. I've never gotten in an ice bath, and I hate being cold. I hate it. Like I'd rather be sweating in the desert than freezing to death.
Yeah.
And my son has, because of track and cross country and the athletics that he does, he's very used to ice baths because he likes to recover quick. So he's like, well, what is that going to be like for you? I was like, I don't know, man. I was like, I got to be really real with you. I'm dreading it. I was like, I don't know how long we're going to be in there for. I don't know what we're supposed to be doing. And the funny thing was is that I learned a lot about myself in that one evolution. I mean, I learned a lot in every evolution, like some really things I was terrible at. Like some of the things I realized I was like, wow, I thought I was a good communicator with my kid, but I need help. But the one evolution is I jumped in that ice bath, and me and Ethan are face to face in this huge trough, 31.5 degrees. And I expected the ice water to hit me like 1,000 knives, right? I've heard that term, and it didn't. I actually got in and I was like, ooh, I was like, this actually isn't as bad as I thought. I'm sure my adrenaline was going. Well, then about 30 seconds or so in, I started to feel it. And I was like, oh, wow. And I'm trying to like do the breath work. And I literally like put my head down. And you probably, I mean, you remember probably more clear than I did, because I was just like, man, I just got to get through this. I got to get through it. I just got to get through it. I just got to get through it. And I realized in that moment, I put my head down and I operated like most men do in their lives. And that is, put your head down, don't feel it, don't show any weakness, and just get through it. Like that was the voice in my head as I was all kind of panicking a little bit. Cause I was like, are we gonna be in here 2 minutes, 10 minutes? Like what's going on? And then all of a sudden I hear your voice in my right ear. And and the voice said this, Larry, look at your son. Your son is watching you. And you said it so calm. And right when I looked up and I saw my son's face, I immediately, like, it was like something happened. Like, and I can't describe it, but it was like something snapped right into place. And I felt good. But I want to know from your perspective, what was it that you were seeing? And what did you see after my son and I locked eyes?
Yeah. So, I mean, I saw your son handling it well.
Yeah.
I saw him, maintaining his composure. He was in it, and he was present in the moment, and his eyes were locked on you. And then as I looked at you, I saw you were internal. You had completely gone internal, where I knew what you were doing. You were sorting through the emotion, you were sorting through the pain, you were sorting through the experience. But you were completely captivated by your own experience, your own emotions, that you had completely lost track of everything else that was going on around you. And forget about the tubs where the other fathers and sons are in those tubs. It was that your son was seeing you go internal, and how you were processing through that, and how I wanted to bring you back into your role as a father, back to your role as the example, and to see your son seeing you, because what happened when you did is exactly what I knew would happen. Is you locked onto him, and all of a sudden the real important things became clear. The ice water didn't change, the temperature didn't change, the external circumstance didn't change, but you locked onto your son, and then you guys started giving each other energy, and you guys started to verbally and non-verbally communicate with each other, and you carried each other through that experience. And your son brought with him certain background and experiences in that one ice bath, and something you didn't have. And I think he was able to provide you some strength and provide you some calm. And I thought that was massively powerful, because, my son's 12 and he's getting to that point, but he's not where your son is at yet, where your son has something to offer you, and you just weren't in a state of mind to where you were processing it. And so it was a really powerful thing. That's all I had to say. I just had to bring you, out of your own head, out of that own loop. And as soon as you heard it, you and your son took it from there. And it was a really, really cool thing to see.
I know I thanked you at the event, but anytime I think of that entire experience, that's always the first and the most powerful moment of that experience, because it was another dad, an instructor that knew exactly what I was going through, and knew exactly. And this is where I think it's so powerful having like-minded people in your life that only want the best for you. Because I would have hated to go through that entire experience where all my son remembered was me with my head down and not looking at him. But because I had you there, a guy who's out there for my best interests, my best experience with my son, the connection with my son, you were able to verbally just sort of tap me on the back and say, hey, man, look up, look at your son, right? It was such a powerful reminder. It was such a powerful moment that I've carried that with me now ever since, meaning anytime that I get in my own head, which a lot of men are very guilty of doing. We get in our head, we start to stuff down our emotions. And then we like literally even our body language, we'll walk around the house, not looking at people. That has helped me so much, being like, get out of your head, get into the people around you, right? Get out of your head. And that was, I just really appreciate it, man, because it was such an influential moment. And I just want to thank you for bringing that to me.
And it was an absolute, I mean, it's my pleasure, to be able to be in a position where I get to play that part and be in that position is truly a privilege, and to be welcomed into that experience, to that degree. And then, too, I want to throw it back at you, Larry, with what you're doing with the Dad Edge and with the movement that you're creating with these other dads and just the mission that you're on, because we all have blind spots and we all have those things that we experience that make us go inward, and we start to internalize things, and we forget. I mean, the ice bath itself, what you experience is that it's just a metaphor for so many things in life, and the mission that you're on, and the fathers and the others that are joining you in the process are all helping each other to provide unique experiences and backgrounds and exposure to those blind spots, right? And I have no doubt that you put me in a circumstance that made me, go inward, and you were there. You would do the same for me, and so that's the power, I think, in the movement that you and the others are on, and that we're on with the Squire program and the project. And I just think it's meaningful on some of the deepest levels, and I love seeing what you're doing with the Dad Edge and the intentionality behind it.
Oh man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I want to make sure all the guys can find everything that you're doing in the world. I know obviously you work with Bedros, you work with the project, work with Squire. I know you do some of your own trainings as well, but what's the best place that men can connect with you?
Probably social media is probably the best thing. My Instagram account, I'm very active on it. It's Matt Schneider _official. There's the link there to the project, to Squire, to my business coaching and the different things that I'm a part of and doing. And I would love for people to connect with me there and help in any way that I can and get connected. If they have any questions about any of the programs, I'd love for them to connect, and I can point them in the right direction.
Awesome. Well, guys, not to worry. Again, we're talking to Matt Schneider. We'll have all of his links in the show notes, especially his Instagram handle. All you have to do is go to thedadedge.com/362 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/362. Matt, this was awesome, man. I've been looking forward to recording this show ever since we got back from the Squire. So this was awesome. Appreciate you coming on and sharing, obviously, everything that you've been through in life, the life lessons that it's taught you, where it's led you at today, and how you're helping other men as well. So thank you for coming on, man.
Thank you, Stud. Appreciate it.
Back at you, man. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.